Well, good, good,
Okay,
good.
now let's start. I was trying to make you laugh, and
Okay.
I got a little chuckle, so I'm content.
Three, two, one, go.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Bearded Bible Brothers. I'm Matt Crosswhite down in Tucson, Arizona, joined by Josiah Marshall up in Utah. How is your day going, sir?
Cold.
Is it really?
It- oh man, yeah. We've started to dip into the 20s up here.
Oh. See, I didn't
Hmm.
think about the fact that uh, our temperature decreased slightly, so that must be having an impact everywhere else.
Yeah, yeah. We. It's funny. Last year, we live within crow's distance, about 20 miles crow's distance of what's known as Peter Sinks, Utah. And last year, Peter Sinks held the lowest recorded uh, record of temperature in the lower 48 states at negative 64 degrees, I believe it was.
Ooh.
Yeah. And it's out in the middle of nowhere. Well, you think, yeah, I say that out in the middle of nowhere. It's on top of a mountain in a really secluded valley. So it's just a region of
Sure.
the mountain range that's called Peter Sinks. But yeah, it's pretty
Mm.
wild that it got to negative
Oh,
64. And we've had, well, I'll wake up some mornings in the deepest of winter here in northern Utah, and it'll be negative 14.
jeez.
It can get cold. Want to come celebrate Christmas with me?
Well, yes, just on the surface, that would be awesome. Can we do it at my place?
Yeah. Right. Right. No kidding.
Oh man.
A white
Negative
Christmas.
12. At
Yeah,
that
that's a
point,
painful
it's
Christmas.
just, yeah, it's just too dang cold. When it gets past zero, really when it gets past the teens in the positive direction, it's just too dang cold.
I
Doesn't
couldn't
matter
agree
what
more.
number it gets to, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But that's
Yep.
why I live in the desert.
It's funny. When I used to work in national parks, my last one was Olympic, and whenever I thought about jumping in the lake, I stopped myself because it's glacial water, so it's got a very
Uh-huh.
low temperature. And then one day I finally decided, okay, I'm going to do it. So I went out to the dock on the edge of Crescent Lake, and I jumped in 3 times,
Oh
and
dear. Three
amazingly,
times.
3 times. I said,
Wow.
I said, now I think I can actually say I jumped into the lake more than once because it was so cold. I was amazed. I made it back to my room and into a hot shower because I thought I was going to pass out. The hypothermia, oh my word, it was so bad. And then
Oh
when
man.
one of my coworkers said, "You don't," they said that they actually saw me jump into the lake, and so they came to me and says, "You don't ever want to jump in the lake. You want to walk into the lake." Oh, okay. Why is that? What's the difference? Well, they said when you walk into the lake, then the cold isn't so biting and so shocking to the body. And then, two,
Mm-hmm.
when you walk in and you can stand still, at least to where the water comes up maybe to your upper chest, there's a natural bubbling effect that takes place because the heat of your body is so high and the cold of the lake is so low. It'll act like a bubble or a barrier around you. It'll create that. And so you can actually stay warm in cold water if you stand still. So
Wow.
I did it and they were right. It was, that was actually quite pleasurable and enjoyable
Did you
to only have to
did
stand
you
there.
do it that same day?
No, 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 no. I did it another day. I think it was another week or two later. I had to
I was
wait
gonna
till my
say,
body warmed
I
up.
was gonna say you jumped in three times. They give you advice on how to do it, and then you just went back out and did it again. And then
Kind of
and, and,
sounds like
and then
me.
you
Boy,
battled
Mike.
hypothermia for the next 6 months.
Oh boy, yeah, that almost sounds like me, a glutton for punishment. But then suffering, true suffering with cold came with working in southern Montana at a small little town called Cook City. And I woke up one morning and it was -7 degrees in my room.
Oh,
And
jeez.
it was just so painful. I thought, why am I putting myself through this? So I had to question whether or not it was worth suffering over to live at almost 9,000 feet at a lodge and just, yeah, shivering my tuchus off while I'm trying to sleep at night. You know what I
Oh
mean?
my gosh. That is that is absurd. I just I don't even have words.
well,
That's too cold.
well, considering our topic today is about suffering, um, suffering well.
Yes,
I can't
and
say I suffered well with that cold, but I can say I suffered it.
you could say you suffered it, and that also kicks off our subject with uh, the question of self-inflicted suffering versus more generalized, just life happens sometimes. And I think yours definitely falls into the category of self-inflicted.
I would agree.
So
I
there's
definitely
that.
agree.
Oh
Oh,
man. I
it's
knew a
funny
guy
that.
that
Go ahead.
I knew a guy that had done prison ministry in the past, and he talked about how some of the inmates just that would come and talk to him, or do the Bible study outreach that he was doing, would come in and talk about how they were like Job, and his response was always, no, you did some really stupid things and got yourself in here. Job did not bring on himself what he went through. You are not Job. You are
Hmm.
paying the penalty for your bad decisions.
Right.
And for the vast majority of people incarcerated, that's true. Of course, there are some innocent people incarcerated,
Oh, I
but for
agree.
the majority of people, that's you, literally you did the crime and now you're doing the time.
Right.
But sometimes when we're suffering, sometimes we did bring it on ourselves, and sometimes we didn't. But
Yep.
oftentimes it's also a combination of the two. Um, Maybe
True.
we made a decision that got us into a situation that went really haywire really quickly.
Hmm.
That certainly
Hmm.
happens as well.
That's true. It really does. And we're left standing there going, okay, so what are we going to use to support ourselves through this? Do we have the support system in place that we can rely on? Do we have reserves, either financially or energy wise
Mm.
or capacity wise? Do we have the resolve or the experience rather to have gone through suffering before and thus be able to know there are ways to help get through whatever is in front of you? Because
Mm.
experience, wow, that plays a part. Because when you're met with trials, troubles, sufferings, discouragement, tribulations, whatever word you want to call it, and it can vary based on the degree of it. Job's was definitely intense. All that
Hmm.
loss, and then being put through the pain of physical ailment. Oh, Lance,
Hmm.
that is he gets to win the award for that extreme of on the spectrum of suffering. um, but at the same time, you learn patience. You learn a lot about yourself for sure,
Mm.
and um, you also learn. You hear the almost quintessential phrase of "I learn who my friends are when I'm having a hard time."
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and
But then but then there are also times when you go through something hard and you do that inventory that you were just describing,
mhm,
and again, for one reason or another, but maybe because you haven't taken the time, or the relational equity you haven't put it in order to have a support system around you, or for whatever reason you don't have a support system around you, maybe for other reasons. uh, you just move to a different area where you don't know anybody, or whatever. A lot of people go through a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
um, but what happens when you do that inventory that you were just describing, and it comes up with you have very, very little. You don't have people to talk to or lean on. You don't have financial resources to help sustain while you figure things out, or whatever. And I'm talking kind of
Mm-hmm.
more the extreme examples, but
Right.
they do happen.
They do indeed. Oh, they do indeed. And boy, what a revealing time it is that we make the choice to either suffer in silence. There's another
Mm.
thought, another line from Fiddler on the Roof. Oh, we suffer and we suffer in silence. We do.
Yep.
But then there's also the exaggerated suffering. Um,
Mm.
and we even see that in scripture too. But I mean, just the idea that, oh, I'm fasting, and so I'm making myself look like I'm fasting, where Jesus says, no,
Ah,
go wash your face and go put on some clothes. This isn't about you looking miserable. This is something private going on between you and God, not you and the rest of the people. So,
right.
and then there's different types of fasting. Don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
still, um, yeah, we can suffer in silence and then just kind of exaggerate something to the point where it gets people's attention because we don't know how else to tell someone, "Hey, I'm having a bad day," or
Yeah.
especially when you don't have somebody that comes up alongside you and puts their arm around you and says, "Hey, how's your day's going?" Um,
Hmm.
that seems to be a rare commodity in our days, right?
It does.
And what was it? Kathy Turkle, I think her name was. She was a scientist back in the early 2000s, I believe it is, and she ended up doing a paper on technology and how technology was being used in, say, old folks' homes, senior citizens' homes, as aids. And she discovered that we are more connected even back in those days, but yet we're more lonely than we've ever been.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I think that not only is it looking for and finding some sort of attention or support or acknowledgement, rather, of your suffering, but truly the appropriate and the proper kind of acknowledgement. Because if you don't find that proper acknowledgement, you find yourself sometimes with people who are just going to enable you to stay in that circle and just start to really
Yes.
marinate in that and treat it kind of like a jacuzzi. And the longer you stay in, you get the picture.
I do. And it might look or feel like a jacuzzi because sometimes, if we're honest, sitting in that feels good.
Yeah.
That we can stay in a place of um, feeling sorry for ourselves, or choosing to remain in a victim mentality
Mm,
because we get something out of it.
right.
Uh, th-
Ooh. Ooh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I just remember Changing Lanes, a movie, I don't know how long ago. I can picture the guy's face. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck's
mm,
playing in this movie, and there's a scene where I may have even mentioned the scene before. He and his sponsor are standing on a loading dock, and they're talking about his um, AA meetings and his
mm,
alcoholic and its alcoholism. And his sponsor finally looked at him and says, "Dude, you're not addicted to alcohol. You're addicted to chaos."
mm,
And I think that's something that therapy, I think sometimes we have this misconstrued idea of what therapy does. It's going
mm-hmm,
to help you deal with your suffering, to deal with your chaos. There was one quote, I can't remember who it was from, that I remember reading that said, no, therapy isn't helping you deal with the therapy. Therapy is giving you the room and space to be able to bring back joy in and learn how to experience it again. And
Mm,
in some cases, I think it's not black or white. There are cases where there is some long standing suffering in your life, and um, it's going to be regurgitated quite often, and you're going to have to
mm,
um, process it again. And so it's
mm-hmm,
not a once and done deal, but at the same time, what I've learned, at least through my own therapeutic experiences, both on or off the couch, um, is that we we it's easy to forget the tools to function and operate when we give our time and our energy over to so much to the negative things that feed us. And so
mm-hmm,
it does take time to transition, and it may not be a complete transition, but it takes time to transition from that negative to the positive and learning how to
mm-hmm.
use the positive, and not only that, live in the positive. Because it's easy to say, oh, yeah, I believe in the positive, but it's another thing to actually live in it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's biblical, right?
Yeah.
We're we're saved and we come into relationship with God, but then it's a lifelong process of renewing our minds and working out our own salvation with fear and trembling and
Mm,
putting one foot in front of the other with God, trusting, in Proverbs it says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path.
hmm.
And sometimes that's all we know. All we know is the next step to take.
Yeah.
And and sometimes, Lord, I would really love a high-powered spotlight about a quarter mile ahead of me so I could see where this thing is going.
Right.
Um, but that's a desire, not that's a want, not a need. What
Hmm.
I need is the light for my feet so I don't stumble on this next step right here.
Exactly.
And and I think some of the time, I think I'm preaching to my own heart here, but I think some of the time when when we are most desirous of seeing what's out ahead, he doesn't show it for, obviously it's for our betterment. He only ever does things out of love, even if it
Mhm.
doesn't feel loving or if it feels like a chastisement or whatever. Um, but do you think maybe if we were to see what was up ahead, we would suddenly become Moses in front of a burning bush and go, "No, no, no, you've got the wrong man," or "That's too big for me," or
Right.
"Gosh, that's really, really scary. I don't know that I can do that."
Yeah. Or just
And
stay away from it in general. Try to find another route.
sure, absolutely. Or
Yeah.
like Abraham and Sarah, um, get out ahead of God and try to make it happen
Yes.
in a
Yes.
way that might make sense humanly. And for
Hmm.
those of us who grew up in church in the West, even what they did didn't make a whole lot of sense humanly. But from the Eastern communalistic perspective, it makes absolute sense. Um, but
Yeah.
oftentimes we try and logic our way through problems. And when I was first learning counseling, grief and loss were my least favorite things to counsel because with every
Mm,
other topic, and I think I've mentioned this on previous episodes, but every single other topic, the counselor can try and help fix or offer perspective or something to maybe remedy the situation, whatever it is.
hmm.
With grief and
Hmm.
loss, there is not a darn thing that you can do to bring that loved one back or to restore a relationship that has ended in a dumpster fire or whatever the loss is. Usually it's
Right.
the death of a loved one, but ain't nothing you can do.
Yeah.
And it's very humbling to sit there with the person and just love on them and just be compassionate. But as it would turn out, that's exactly what they needed to begin with.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think part of that goes into also the the ability to look at what you're perceiving as suffering and being able to address it properly, to basically be able to label it properly. Because you do
Yes.
have external forces and external sources of suffering, but then there's also the
Mhm.
internal, where we think our day's just so rotten because of just something we thought about or something we think about. And sometimes we tend to think that what's going on in our head is the reality that's going on around us. And we look at people and go, wait a minute, why don't you see what I see? Um,
Mhm.
and so as a result, you've got this conflicting viewpoint of what's real and what's not real, right? Like
Mm.
the scene with the guy on the loading dock. He thought his problem was just alcohol, but no,
Yeah.
he continued to make decisions that created chaos in his life because that's what he was used to. That's what
Mhm.
you could say fed on, but at the same time, it's something that he acquired a taste for, so to speak.
Yeah,
And
that's where he was comfortable.
exactly. And so I think that can be one of the harder realizations for some people, because even when you look at the story of Job, you've got his friends coming up and telling him what
Mhm.
suffering is. Oh, Job, let me correct you, my friend. Your suffering is not what you think it is, or you don't know who you think God is, for that matter, or maybe you've
Mm.
sinned and this is the judgment upon your sin or something like that, and you go, whoa, am I more screwed up than I thought? Is this suffering in and out and all around? I mean, I can't imagine what it was like for Job, and I frankly don't want to, but at the same time, you just
Right.
think, ooh, I don't know if I could. Man, I don't know. I know the experiences I've gone through with suffering have brought me to the ability to be able to tackle certain types of suffering, but oh my
Yeah.
word, the idea of seeing and experiencing what Job went through, ouch.
Mhm.
And then to have friends who have the audacity to look at him and say, oh, it's not what you think it is. It's
Mhm.
that Princess Bride ideology. Oh, I don't think it means what you think it means. But
Any opportunity to bring up Princess Bride is a good opportunity.
it's like, are there rocks ahead? If they are, we will be dead. No more rhymes now, I mean it. Anyone want a peanut? Ah, there you go.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. But oh
Oh
me.
goodness.
But I think it becomes I think suffering becomes one of the features of life that help us discern and decide what type of people we're going to surround ourselves with. Now, for
Yeah.
some people, though, I think they're and they have the mentality of they're stuck and they can't get anyone better.
Mm.
Um, there's that victim mentality, and then there's nothing better in mentality, or you know what I'm talking about. But at the same time, um, I, I I think that for anybody that's being put up a tree, so to speak, and a lion's crawling around underneath them, they'll either have to make the decision to stay in the tree. And if they stay in the tree, are they going to just sit there and relax and not worry about the thing climbing the tree, or are they going to panic? Or if they're going to address the problem, are they going to do it constructively, or they going to make the cat angrier? You know what I mean?
Mm. Yes, indeed. Yes,
Common
indeed.
feature of storytelling and story writing. I remember years ago when I first started to meet and get to know my writing mentor, Mr. John Fornoff. He told me one time, put your character up a tree and see what happens. And I
I
thought,
like
ooh,
that.
I like that a lot. And one of the things I realized later, even in talking to him about writing, was that I wasn't just asking him questions about writing, but I ultimately asked him questions about life. And
Mm.
because story emulates life, it reflects life, it is life, because we are giving it life, we are giving it meaning, we are giving it purpose.
Mhm.
And when we're able to see ourselves in a character, it tends to give us an understanding, a vocabulary, a perspective that gives us a new way of approaching our problem, which I think becomes more important because if you're left stuck in that cycle of thinking and that's all you've got until something interrupts or falls across the track of that brain that just seems to be running nonstop in your head,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what else is going to happen to in order to make that happen? And I think that's when we get into this idea that salvation is the supernatural thing, to where we don't do anything. God, I want you to save me from my suffering, and all we've got to do is just sit back and rest. Now, forgive me, I'm not going to say we don't just sit back and relax and at least trust God in doing what God can do. But at the same time, salvation is a cooperation of efforts.
Absolutely.
The Israelites had to choose to get up and walk out of their homes out of Egypt. They weren't magically transported to Sinai.
Yep. Noah didn't get a big boat. He was told to build one.
Exactly. Yes, sir. And so I think sometimes it also challenges what we perceive as not only being suffering, but also what we see as salvation from that suffering. And I use salvation, and I know it's a theological term, but at the same time, I think it can translate into other areas of our lives because we don't want to be left there. We want help. We want freedom. What is that? Psalm 104, I believe it is. Psalm 103, 104 talks about how God pulls us from the pit and crowns us with love and compassion. There are things that we cannot do to save ourselves, and God does do that, or other people come along to do it for us. I mean, I remember one time in my life where I couldn't afford to buy food, and someone just came up and handed me food. And my reaction was, wow, thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's even, especially in those moments where you haven't said anything to anybody, that you experience the reality that God is real and he is working through those who are willing to partner with him and seeing not only his will be done, but the lives of people around them, seeing God's work be to their benefit and to their advantage as growing instead of just existing.
Yes. And I think it's super important to remember what you brought up, that God is looking for partners. That's part of the whole narrative of Scripture is he wants partners. He's not looking to snap his fingers and have a bunch of robots do exactly what they ought to do. He could have set up everything that way. He chose not to.
Right. And he didn't. No, he didn't. He sure didn't. And he also, when you brought up this topic earlier, I actually went looking in
for
Hebrews.
Suffering? Oh.
Yeah, I wanted to look for it. Yeah. It's kind of like those
sufficient for the day is its own trouble, Josiah. You don't need to go looking for it.
Right? It feels like major pain in a way. You're just finding something else to have him do to you.
Oh, right.
But anyway, I was looking at Hebrews, and it's Hebrews chapter 4, where it's talking about God's rest. And the word there from work or works is ergon. And another word that's more commonly found over in James, but it's also there in chapter 4, verse 15, is the feeling of our infirmities or the suffering. And it's this, it becomes this isolating experience that we think, oh, where is God when I need him the most? But or more specifically, Jesus, if Jesus is going to be the author of our salvation, where is he? Well, he's
Sure.
exactly where he's supposed to be. He's standing at the right hand of the Father, still in human form, looking at the Father and saying, okay, right now, my friend and brother Josiah really needs some help and encouragement right now. Can we
Mm,
can we get together with one of our other partners, with one of our other children, one of my other siblings? Because in Hebrews we are referred to as siblings of Jesus in some way,
mm-hmm,
and send them over and maybe use them as an encouragement for him right now. And
mm,
because as Hebrews 4 illustrates, he's gone through what we're experiencing.
mm-hmm,
But when we go through what we experience, we have two ways of responding to it. One of the ways is more in keeping with aiming at God's heart and seeing his will done in our lives and in other people's lives, such as not dumping all of our hurt and anguish onto the greeter at Costco when he asks, "Can you
mm.
scan your card, please?" And then reliving with him the moment where you walked into the store to go to the lunch counter and a manager stops you and physically accosts you because they never asked you for your card, but they expected you to show it to them, whether they asked for it or not. And you go, wait a minute,
Mm.
that wasn't really constructive. And then at that point, you're just spreading bitterness, which in turn is labeled sin because it is breaking and it's missing God's heart and it's breaking God's heart to see what we're doing and how it's causing more chaos. But here's
Mhm.
Jesus being called without sin. And so he is, through what Jesus' example is of living a very Torah filled life, he's demonstrating for us how we can interact with people. Now, I wouldn't suggest walking up to somebody who's being rude and causing you causing you to suffer and calling them a fool or a whitewashed tomb to their face.
Yeah, probably not the best idea.
Probably not. But but at the same time, find constructive ways of dealing with whatever's going on internally, externally, and or both. And the word that I ended up coming back to in all this study was a word of aman, or as we sometimes read it as amen,
Mm.
Amen. Now, aman, Aman, is the word that's attached to Abraham when it says he believed and it was credited to him as righteousness. That word
Mm.
believe there is the word aman, but there's a difference between the aman of let's say of Abraham and let's say the pistio of Satan, because pistio is a Greek word that's also translated as belief, but
Mm.
the devil's not being credited with righteousness.
Of course.
But what he is giving credence to is the existence of God. He knows God exists.
Yeah.
And he can give credence to the fact that God is very real and he's going to do what he does. Now, he is not having a man that saving belief, but he has that pistio of the, oh, darn, God is in control and I am not, for belief. He is very much there and working. And so when we think of the word aman, not only does it carry this element of effort and cooperation, but it also carries with it an element of rest, as we
Mm.
find in Hebrews chapter 4. Because one description I found, and it was back to Chaim Big Torah, I thank God for that guy. I mean, his work is really quite poignant sometimes. He
Mhm.
was describing Aman in the ancient context of a nursery rhyme.
Mm.
And it was really quite fascinating because even though, while the nursery rhyme was of a baby in its mother's arms, it wasn't so much focused on whatever limerick it was focused on the experience of being held, nurtured, taken care of, protected
Mhm.
in a total way when you have really no way of defending yourself. but you are that baby that you're entrusting unknowingly, even sometimes, the fact that I am safe in my mother's arms.
Mm-hmm.
But that still requires some communication. You're still in your mother's
Right.
arms, but you're hungry. Well, you either wait for the mother to provide you something, or you try to squirm out of her arms and crawl to the pantry and ransack the snacks. Sorry, speaking from experience there.
Couldn't tell.
Couldn't tell.
Yeah, I had no idea that was the case.
But you see what I mean with this is that God is,
Yeah.
as he's often described through the Torah and even through the Tanakh, the First Testament, and even in some cases of the New Testament, you see this work indirectly of him. There's this understanding that he's carrying us. I ran into a Jewish man one time at a DMV, and he's sitting over in his seat waiting to be called up, and I'm sitting in my seat, and I had just gotten done reading something. What is that? Exodus 23, maybe. It was regarding God carrying Israel. And I went over and asked him, I said, "Excuse me, sir, I've got this question regarding this carrying idea." He says, "Well, think of it like a bird, because when God is carrying Israel, he is using himself as a shield, because the baby birds travel on the top of their parent in between the wings before they can fly." And he said that, I was like, "Ooh, oh, wow." Because he quoted another verse. He said, "Even the arrow of the enemy will not strike me, because you carry me," or something along those lines. And he says that's what it's referring to.
Yep, and how he kept starting in Exodus 19, and then throughout the First Testament, he kept saying how I bore you up on eagle's wings
Yes.
out of Egypt. That's
Right.
super cool.
Isn't that cool? And so we do have this element of complete reliance, and then we also have this element of there's something I can do. Now, I'm going to get personal here, because I'm not about to say this about somebody else, but for myself, I gained weight recently, a few months ago, and I was quite discouraged by it. And I wouldn't put it quite along the lines of suffering, but at the same time, it was, why am I going through this? And I'm dealing with health problems, and it's the health problems' fault and all this jazz. And then one day it just kind of clicked with me of thinking, wait a minute, I'm sitting down when I could be up and trying to move around when I have the energy. So, Josiah, how about you get up and go take a short walk as far as you think you can, and then turn around and walk back. You're not trying to achieve a marathon or run a marathon. Just go the distance you can and then go back to the house. But don't just stop. Find ways of cooperating and finding out ways of dealing with whatever problems in front of you. But that doesn't mean that there aren't those moments where you're struggling.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to say this as just a pure testimony of who God is and what he does with those who follow him and his disciples. We were living in Leavenworth, Kansas, and I had just become a stay-at-home dad, and Heather had started driving 66 miles one way to go to work out in the state capital of Kansas. And we were, oh boy, I mean, we weren't very far along in our marriage, but we had a property back out in Utah that we had rented out. But our arrival in Kansas was me to work as a civilian contractor at Fort Leavenworth. And unfortunately, health and other things caused me and many others, in fact, to no longer have jobs at Fort Leavenworth because of a 2012 sequester. But in order to make ends meet, we started putting a lot on credit cards. And so by the
Oh.
time I had become a stay-at-home dad, we had some pretty significant debt that we were trying to tackle.
Mm.
But also at the same time, try to figure ways of, okay, how do we put food on the table?
Right.
And we had wants. Yeah, we want we want the debt gone, but we had needs. We've got a bill coming up. We have bills coming up, and my wife had already totaled up the amount. And I went out to the mailbox one day, and there was a letter in there from some friends of ours in California. And there was a note that said, "We were in Bible study last week, and your name just kind of came to mind during while we were praying, and I realized we needed to take up a collection for you." Included in
Mm.
the envelope was a check to the penny of the amount that my wife had
Wow.
added up. And we had, if I remember correctly, I think we had something like 10 cents in the bank. And then that check arrived. And that got us through the next 2 weeks until our next paycheck. And it was just, wow, God, you really see what we're struggling with here. Sorry, I
Mm.
don't mean to get emotional, but and it's not just even in those moments, but I think it's also in the same moments when I'm going to talk you up for a second. When you call me up and you you end up providing encouragement and affirmation after a very negative experience at a local church and
Mm.
us having to leave that church and
Yeah.
just feeling like nothing about our lives were the same or normal again. But as we went through the process of even that, of just realizing our faith is not, our relationship and our partnership is not bound up in an institution of man. It is
Right.
bound up in a relationship with the Almighty God, who is also partnered up with Matt Crosswhite, who I happen to have met only months before. And
Mm.
in those moments, you ended up just offering some very kind and thoughtful encouragement in a time where it felt like we were losing everything, all of our support system, all of what
Mm.
I grew up doing, going to church on a Sunday morning and playing drums or preaching or teaching kids, or even one job I had was cleaning churches. But church was no longer part of our life anymore. But
Mm.
the time that you and I have gotten to spend with each other has not necessarily, I wouldn't say replace everything, but it's definitely encouraged me to realize there's still ways of fellowshipping, even if there's not a band playing or
Mm-hmm.
someone giving a very lengthy sermon. So
Sure.
I just appreciate, I say all that to also say, I just appreciate even the fact that God has used both of us in each other's lives to encourage each
Yes.
other and help each other when we do go through those hard times, and to have the courage to even call. It's I'll admit that there are times it wasn't very easy to text you or call you and say, "Hey, man, I need to vent, or I'm having a hard day, or this is happening," and it's
Yeah.
making life discouraging. I really appreciate you for that. I really do.
Likewise. Likewise. And you know that recently our family has been a little bit discouraged on some things going on, and I've been able to do the same in calling you. So
Mhm.
this has been a really great friendship on both directions.
Mhm. I agree. And I think it's with that said that we can close out this podcast in knowing
Mm.
that if even if you have one person or if you have no one, there are people out there who would care. It's You're
Mm-hmm.
walking down a dirt road and you feel like nobody cares, but Jesus does care, and he sees you walking down that dirt road, and
Yeah.
he cares enough to try to bring people into your path he knows that can be a help to you, even if it's just either replacing the tire or saying good morning to at least brighten
Mm-hmm.
your day a little bit. But hopefully you can come to a stage or place in life where you can find that peace, that rest, that I was talking about earlier, because God has provided that rest, and we have an opportunity to enter into that rest, which is part of Aman, which is part of Irgon. And so, even if right now, as you're listening to our voice, my voice, and you are discouraged, either something's happened at work, something's happened with family, something happened with church, or whatever the case may be, or you have this one thought that's just been with you for so long and you don't know what to do with it. Please, please do not let that suffering consume you. Rely on the knowledge of knowing that your Savior is standing at the right hand of your Heavenly Father, intervening for you. And that through him, he will offer a way for you to step out of that. Whether it's immediately or in a short time, it will happen. Things will get better. Until then, please feel free to write us at beardedbiblebrothers@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Even if it's, you know what, I'm really discouraged right now and I could use an encouraging word. We'd be happy to hear what's going on. And if anything, just at least try to offer you some prayer and support as you go through whatever life is thrown at you. But we thank you for listening, and we look very much forward to our next podcast and you joining with us as we continue to learn that you are enough.